Welcome to War Room, the official podcast of the U.S. Army War College online journal, graciously supported by the Army War College Foundation. Please join the conversation at warroom.armywarcollege.edu. We hope you enjoy the program.
Make sure not to miss a single episode and subscribe to A Better Peace, the War Room podcast, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. The views expressed in this presentation are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect those of the U.S. Army War College, U.S. Army, or Department of Defense.
The U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center's lecture series is presented to a live audience and provides insight into leadership and warfighting from scholars and soldiers, helping us educate future military leaders and the public. The opinions and statements of the speakers featured on this presentation are not necessarily the views of the United States Army or the Army Heritage and Education Center.
Welcome, everybody. This is such an exciting night. We're so glad you're here. Thank you so much for coming. I am the director of the Army Heritage and Education Center, and it is a really wonderful place. We have the collections of over 200 general officers, their papers, as well as 37 chief staffs of the Army. There's a lot of different things that are going on in our collections every day with our research, and we're so delighted to host the talk tonight, which reflects current events and history as we know it. We are honored to welcome General Retired Frank Mckenzie, Jr. He will talk to us about his recently published book, The Melting Point, High Command and War in the 21st Century. His host, Dr. Thomas Spar, spent the day with him at the War College, which was especially fortunate as our War College students, some of whom I know are here, they are wrapping up their military strategy and campaigning course. And so I'm very much looking forward to the Q&A conversation from the firsthand experiences of both of these men. Dr. Thomas Spar is a Desario Chair of Theater and Strategic Intelligence at the U.S. Army War College. In October 2024, Dr. Spar retired from the Army after a 27-year military career as an Army intelligence officer. His final position was serving as the chair of the Department of Military Strategy, Planning, and Operations at the U.S. War College. His intelligence assignments included service as the Chief of Staff of J2 Intelligence Directorate for Operation Resolute Support, Afghanistan, and the Senior Intelligence Officer G2 for Fort Carson, Colorado, and the 4th Infantry Division. Dr. Spar holds an MS and a PhD in history from The Ohio State University and a Master's of Strategic Studies from the U.S. Army War College. Today, General Mckenzie serves as the Executive Director of the University of South Florida's Global and National Security Institute and the Executive Director of the Florida Center for Cybersecurity. A native of Birmingham, Alabama, and a 1979 graduate of the Citadel, General Mckenzie was commissioned into the Marine Corps and trained as an infantry officer. He has commanded levels at the platoon, company, battalion, Marine Expeditionary Unit, and component levels. In March 2019, General Mckenzie was promoted to the grade of general and assumed command of the U.S. Central Command, known as CENTCOM. General Mckenzie retired from the Marine Corps on the 1st of April, 2022, completing more than 42 years of service. General Mckenzie is currently the president of the board of directors of the Institute of Applied Engineering at the University of South Florida, a distinguished senior fellow on national security at the Middle East Institute, a member of the International Advisory Committee of the National Council on U.S.-Arab Relations, and a member of the National Security Advisory Council U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. So we're super excited, looking forward to hearing his thoughts and insights on leadership from his book, The Melting Point, High Command and War in the 21st Century. Please help me welcome General Mckenzie.
Good evening, and thank you for coming tonight. I'd like to just first thank Dr. Kate LeMay and the Army Heritage and Education Center for hosting this event. This is such a great forum and such an important place in our nation's history. Is the Army's largest archive. And it's a terrific museum, which we just walked through. Prior to this, I thought we were going to be late because General Mckenzie is such a historian. We had to drag out of there to get him up on the stage. And if you've read the book, you will know what a historian he really is, because he's laced it in there beautifully throughout. I served under General Mckenzie from 2019 to 2020 when I was a colonel in the J2 Intelligence Directorate at Resolute Support Headquarters in Kabul, Afghanistan. So this is really a special event for me, an honor to be up on the stage with him tonight. General Mckenzie has written a fantastic book, The Melting Point, High Command and War in the 21st Century. And in it, he provides insight into what is one of the most difficult and important positions in our government and our military, the combatant commander in wartime in the U.S. Central Command, or CENTCOM. The CENTCOM Command oversees all of the U.S. military operations in the Middle East, and he did this during one of the most complex times really in the region in our history. I also find it personally amazing as a historian myself how quickly he turned this book after his retirement, and it's really a tribute to his skills as a scholar. The Melting Point, it's unique because it focuses exclusively on his time in combatant command, and thus it provides details about the role, that role specifically, and the complex operations he commanded, such as the strike on Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian Quds Force commander, in January of 2020, the strikes on multiple leaders of the terrorist group ISIS-K, including Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in October of 2019 in Syria, as well as overseeing that difficult withdrawal from Afghanistan in October of 2021. And for the audience, the way we'll do this tonight is I'll ask him a series of questions, and then I'll open it up to you for about the last 20 or 25 minutes for your questions as well. So, sir, what I'd like to start with tonight is just the title of the book, right? The Melting Point, High Command and War in the 21st Century. What is the significance of the title, The Melting Point?
Sure, thanks, Tom. And before I start talking about that, it's great to be with you here tonight. This is the second time in my life I've been to Carlisle. I came here as a 3-star to lecture to the War College about global integration about 8 years ago. So my second time here. It's a beautiful place. I've really enjoyed it. Maybe not a little nicer in the summer, and maybe I can get back when the weather's a little warmer. I'll take Tampa any day, I just got to tell you. But a beautiful place, and everyone's been very welcoming. I certainly appreciate that. When we get to questions tonight, I like questions. As I told the students earlier today, I'm a 4-star general. There's no inner monologue of inadequacy or insufficiency going on inside my head. So I'm happy to talk about anything you want to talk about. You're not going to embarrass me with a question. There's nothing you can ask me that I haven't been asked, probably in a controversial, direct, and demeaning manner at some point. So I'm happy to have that conversation with you as we get into it. So The Melting Point. So I picked the title from a great book by Barbara Tuchman, and the book is The Guns of August, which is a magnificent narrative history of how Europe went to war in the years leading up to, but particularly in the summer of 1914, and how war plans of great powers tended to force them into war. And I really liked the book. I think she's a beautiful writer. The book is still in print, and I would strongly recommend reading the book. But in the book, she has a line where she says, that melting point of warfare, the temperament of the individual commander. And I was an individual commander at a very high level during some pretty significant times, and so I thought that was a good way to title the book, and that's how I picked it. I was as Tom said, I was a combatant commander. The United States has 11 combatant commanders. 7 are geographic. I was a geographic combatant commander. 4 are functional combatant commanders, like Special Operations Command, Transportation Command, etc. But Central Command, which is the area I was responsible for, is 21 countries, Egypt in the west, Pakistan in the east, Kazakhstan in the north, to Yemen in the south. So it's a large area. 3 of the world's choke points are there. The Bab el-Mandeb, which has been in the news recently, the Strait of Hormuz, which is always in the news, and of course the Suez Canal. The world's religions come together there. They're ancient entities that we see the struggles every night on the nightly news. So it's a significant part of the world. But the other thing about the temperament of the individual commander, as a combatant commander, you work for 2 people. You work for the President of the United States, and you work for the Secretary of Defense. You don't work for the Joint Chiefs, you don't work for the Joint Staff, and you don't work for Congress. The chain of command is pretty clear. And so that's a unique perspective. And it's a unique perspective because you have the opportunity to give policy advice. And I've given policy advice directly to presidents, and sometimes they took it and sometimes they didn't, which is absolutely the way it's supposed to work. But then I was responsible for execution. So here's the thing that makes it interesting. A lot of people give advice. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff used to be Mark Milley, friend of mine. Now it's C.Q. Brown, another friend of mine. They are the senior military they're senior military officer of the United States, and they're the senior military advisor to the president and to the Secretary of Defense. But here's the thing: the chairman can't give an order. He's not in the chain of command. He cannot cause a ship to sail. He cannot cause an airplane to take off. He cannot cause a bomb to drop. He cannot do those things because he is not in the chain of command. The chiefs, the Chief of Staff of the Army, Commandant of the Marine Corps, they do important things. They raise the force. They train the force. They maintain the force. They think about the force, what it's going to be in the future. They do all of those things. But what they can't do is they can't give an order to the force. They can't employ the force. Only combatant commanders can do that. So it is a unique perspective because, again, you straddle that divide between policy advice and actual military execution at the strategic level, the theater level. So it's a remarkable and very interesting perspective. And the last thing I'd say just before closing it out is, at the level of giving policy advice to the president, you've got someone who's grappling with the president's grappling with, questions of strategy, questions of policy, questions of practical politics. And any U.S. president, not just this one or the last one or any one of recent years or even going back a long time, any U.S. president is going to take politics into account when he or she makes a decision. To believe otherwise is actually to not understand some of the basic history of the U.S. and its military component. So happy to talk about that as we get into it a little bit later. But it was a unique place to be at a unique time where a lot of demands were placed on the force, a lot of demands were placed on U.S. Central Command. Through luck, timing, opportunity, whatever, I happened to be the officer that was there during that period of time, and I wanted to write something about it. And I'll just close by saying, one of the things I can do is I can write. I can write quickly and easily, and it's actually a release for me to write. I was a speechwriter a couple of times when I was much younger, so I enjoy it. The book was pretty easy to kick out. The security review was another story completely,
yes,
but
sure.
the book was pretty easy.
I'm sure. That's great, sir. So we talk to our students at the Army War College all the time about something we call historical mindedness, right? And we're also sitting at the Army Heritage and Education Center here, a focal point for history in our Army. You make terrific historical references throughout the book and tie them into modern day events. Can you describe to us how your study of history on the Middle East and really history writ large affected the way you commanded?
Yeah, so I think when you're a senior commander, particularly in a time of great crisis, you want to guard against a thing that a mentor of mine, a guy named Jim Mattis, many of you know his name, he called the fallacy of historical presentism. The idea, because it's happening to me right now, is worse and different than anybody else. And so you got to stay away from that, because in fact, most of the things that happen, particularly in the military, have happened before. There's not a lot of new things out there. The planes may look a little different. People tend to still respond the same, though, under moments of great stress, with courage or not. And so I always drew great strength from that, because when I was having a problem, I could go back and find an example to take a look at. I'll cite one. I never really thought about resigning seriously, because I don't believe that four-star generals should resign over policy disputes with civilian leadership. I think that's a political decision. But I went back and I looked at Louis Sorley's book, Honorable Warrior, about Harold K. Johnson, Chief of Staff of the Army, and one of the great Chiefs of Staff of the U.S. Army. So in the 1960s, as most of you know, he was the chief during part of Vietnam. At one point, Harold K. thought seriously about resigning. He went over to the White House with the other chiefs, even undid the clutch backs on his stars so he could take them off and throw them on the president's desk. He did not ultimately choose to resign, thinking it wasn't the right thing to do at that period of time. Later on in life, General Johnson thought he made a mistake. I think he did the right thing the first time, and I think he was right not to resign, even though he had profound policy differences with the commander-in-chief. Because the fact of the matter is this: if the commander-in-chief gives a legal order, then the United States military should execute that order. And when I was at Central Command, I had 14 lawyers on my staff, eager to tell me what a legal order was. Of course, I knew what a legal order was. I've never gotten an illegal order in 42 years, 10 months of service. But if you get an order, even if you don't like it, you're obligated to carry it out. And that's particularly important when you're a 4-star officer, because the act of expressing openly policy disagreement by resignation is, I think, dangerous to the Republic. And in fact, I'd go further to say any president has the right to make a wrong decision and the right to see that wrong decision executed by the U.S. military to the best of their ability, even if it goes directly against military advice. And I've been precisely in that situation. So and here's why. The principle of civilian control, which is fundamental to the United States, is more important than the quality of a single decision. That's what I think. I talk about it in the book a little bit. There are other views on that, but those are the views I had when I was in that situation.
So I want to drill down on the drone strike that killed Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian Quds Force commander, in January of 2020. It was a very controversial decision, and you do a great job of describing it in the book. But can you share with the audience the decision process and the ethical dilemma that might have presented itself? And looking back, sir,
Sure.
do you think it was the right choice?
Sure. So let me just begin by saying I thought it was the right choice at the time. I thought it was the right choice when I gave advice to the president on it. I thought it was the right choice that night when I went home and sat down with my wife. I have never lost a minute of sleep over it. I think it's the right choice today. And I believe that people are alive today that would not be alive had we not struck Qasem Soleimani that night in Baghdad in January. So how do we get there? I'll try to boil it down. And let's start with Iran. Iran is a country that is going to be around for a long time. It's a country with 2,000 years of history. It has a theocratic regime that I think is poisonous, deadly to itself and to its neighbors. But Iran as a country is going to be around for quite a while. So we should not think we're going to get rid of Iran. Iran's going to be a power in that region for many years, whatever the shape of its government is. Most Americans, when we talk about Iran, think of 1979, 78, 79, when they took hostages and held them for 442 days, embarrassed President Carter, and only ended when President Reagan came into office. A more discerning view might examine the United States and Iran in 1953, when we deposed a sitting popularly elected prime minister and reinstalled the Shah on the peacock throne because it was in our interest to do so. And going back even further, for Iranians, they think about things that happened 1,000 years ago like it was yesterday. That is not the American way, and I'm an American just like you, so I don't claim any special dispensation there. I just say they have a much different view of history than we do, because our history is so short and compressed, whereas theirs is long and elegiac, going back millennia. So something just to think about. In the spring and summer of 2019, the Trump administration is squeezing Iran pretty hard with what you may know as the maximum pressure campaign. The Iranians were trying to push back, and in the summer of 2019, they did some things to push back. They attacked some oil tankers through proxies. They shot down one of my RQ-4 drones that was flying over the Strait of Hormuz. And then a little bit later, they struck into Saudi oil fields with what they claimed with a deniable strike, but nonetheless, the evidence was clear and compelling that it was launched from metropolitan Iran against Saudi Arabia. And as we went into the fall, we probably had some opportunities to make them stop by a show of force. We did not do that. So the lesson with something like that is you stop it at the beginning or you pay a much higher price later on. And much of this activity was being orchestrated by an Iranian general named Qasem Soleimani, major general, not the most senior general in Iran. In fact, he was at a relatively low level. Iran has a joint chiefs of staff, and they have a military command and control structure they call the Artesh, which is not particularly different than ours. What Soleimani led was he didn't even lead the IRGC, the Republican Guards. He led the Quds Force, which is an elite within the IRGC. There's a separate IRGC commander that's actually above him in the IRGC chain of command. But what Soleimani did, a couple of things. First of all, he had a familial relationship with the supreme leader. He could talk to the supreme leader. He'd go have dinner with the supreme leader. It was a father-son relationship. So he could go to him to get ideas approved. Second, he was a pretty good tactician, and he was very good going into Iraq, slapping heads with the proxy groups that are there, all the Shia militant groups, and aligning them to all sort of steer in the same direction as much as you could do with that. And he was very aggressive, very, very, very aggressive. So people ask me all the time, he's a great commander. Was he their Rommel? if I were making comparisons to Nazis, he's not the guy I'd pick. I'd compare him to Reinhard Heydrich if I were going to compare him to someone. But nonetheless, he was effective. And in the fall, winter of 2019, there was compelling intelligence information that he was going to fly into Iraq in late December, early January. He was going to coordinate an attack on our embassy, which you may recall was already under siege from proxy groups then at that time, and also to coordinate attacks against other U.S. bases in the region and our allies and friends in the region as well. So at that point, my recommendation was the risk of inaction, the risk of letting him proceed, was higher than the risk of action. And there were risks attendant to both choices. I mean, if you strike him, we knew the Iranians were going to do something in return. That was very clear. We knew that. But I thought if we didn't do something, then he would probably develop a mass casualty attack against our embassy or one of our bases in the region. And that is not speculation on my part. I can't share the information with you, but I'm just telling you, that's the information was very clear to me. I found it convincing. The president had the authority to order the strike. He ordered the strike. We took the strike. He flew into Baghdad late one night, got off, and was driving away from the airport. It was 2 January in Tampa, 3 January in the theater, and he got on what's called Route Irish. All the roads in Afghanistan, all the roads in Iraq have code names. Route Tampa is the big MSR up from Kuwait. Route Irish goes really from the Baghdad airport downtown. A lot of my friends died on Route Irish. So when we had the opportunity to strike him on Route Irish, it didn't bother me a bit. And I think it just, karma sometimes comes around strangely like that. So we struck him, and then we began to think about, and we had actually done a great deal of thought before that about what the Iranians might do in response. I'd had an opportunity to give advice on this, which I gave, and we knew that they would probably strike us. We didn't think it would be a huge attack, but it would be one designed to cause American casualties. As you know, about a week later, night of, I want to say 8, 9 January, they struck Al-Assad with about 15 missiles, big missiles. The first time U.S. soldiers and airmen had ever been attacked by ballistic missiles. And there's a big difference between a ballistic missile warhead and the warhead of an artillery projectile or even a short-range rocket. These are much bigger. So because our intelligence warning was good, we were able to reposition our forces. Nobody died. As you may be aware, a number of soldiers and airmen had mild traumatic brain injury. I have to use the word mild because that's actually the diagnosis. If I had it, I don't think it would be mild, and I wouldn't call it that. I'm just telling you what the official diagnosis is. That took a couple of days to become apparent that had happened, but nobody died. Had somebody died, and they were trying to kill Americans, believe me. They weren't signaling, hey, we're going to strike you guys, move your forces. No, they were trying to kill Americans. They didn't, and we were able to walk away from that. The Iranians landed a blow on air. We probably saved them from themselves a little bit that night. But the Soleimani strike, the other thing it did was it had a profound effect on Iranian thinking that has effect today, right today, it has an effect on Iranian thinking. They never doubted U.S. capability. They can count. They know our weapon systems. They know what we can do to them. There's no doubt about that. But what they have always doubted was our will. So I would just share briefly, a couple of years ago, the then foreign minister of Iran, a guy named Zarif, made the mistake of recording an oral history. And of course it was leaked and appeared, you can look it up in the New York Times. And in it, he said the death of Qasem Soleimani was worse than losing a major city in Iran. We have not yet fully been able to recover from it. And I think it's a pretty accurate statement because it let them know the United States has the power when we decide to do so to reach out very directly and cause significant damage to them and their organization. That is something that lays over the current crisis that operates in the region today. And we can talk a little bit more about that here in just a minute. But that strike was something that was very clear to me at the time. And again, I'm not boasting about it or anything else, but it just seemed it was something that was necessary to be done. I haven't lost a minute of sleep over it since that night.
Yeah. I can remember that distinctly, sir. I was at Kabul when they displaced me to Bagram because we were you gave the order to disperse forces throughout to avoid attacks. We didn't know where it was coming, but we spread our leadership out across the country to avoid their ability to have a successful strike. So, and sir, so while you made the recommendation to conduct an attack on Qasem Soleimani through a drone strike, you made a very different recommendation for the attack on the ISIS-K leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in October of 2019. Can you describe the circumstances surrounding the al-Baghdadi raid? It was a special operations raid, and why you decided to go that route, which was a higher risk, a relatively high risk operation.
So, Baghdadi was an evil man. There's no other word to describe him. He was an evil man. He responsible probably for the rape and death of Kayla Mueller, an American citizen, and for the rapes and deaths of many other people as well. So personally, there was a lot of blood on his hands, and the organization he led, as you know, was uniquely malignant and foul. So in the spring of 2019, right before I took command, Joe Votel, my predecessor at Central Command, some of you may know him, a great Army general, finished the physical destruction of the Islamic State in the Euphrates River Valley of Syria and into Iraq a little bit. And we finished them off down south. Baghdadi was never a die in the last ditch kind of guy. He wasn't going to fight to the death with his guys. So he fled out west, somewhere into western Iraq. And he was our number one target. So I had guidance from on high that we wanted to get him. So we looked at him I came in April. We looked at him over the summer. By the early fall, we and our in the intelligence agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, we had discovered that we thought we knew where he was. He was living in a walled compound way out in western Iraq, about 5 miles or less from the Turkish border, in an area that really wasn't friendly to ISIS. The militant groups there were violent, but they were not pro-ISIS military groups, proxy groups. They didn't know he was there. But what he did, he went out there. He took two or three wives, two wives. He took a couple of soldiers, if you will, to work, and he took 14 children. And he took 14 children for a couple of reasons, one of which was to make it harder for us to target him, because he knew we would have trouble targeting a place if he's surrounded by children all the time. And he was very careful to always be surrounded by children. So we learned that he was there. We began to look at him. And how do you look at him? Well, you do it through human intelligence. I'll leave that there. And then you do it through drones. You position something up high to look at him. And when he would come out and pray, he'd come out on the balcony of this little series of houses. He'd always have children around him. When he'd go out, he would always have the children around him. And so it was my job to strike him, kill him or capture him. So I looked at options to strike him from a drone or a manned aircraft, whatever. But I couldn't come up with one that would not kill children. As best I tried, I just couldn't. And believe me, it wasn't me doing the work. It was the guys down in North Carolina, and they're the best in the world at this. They work for me, Joint Special Operations Command at this time. They're very, very, very good at it. And we could not find a solution that promised to have very little collateral damage. With all the weaponeering we've got, we just couldn't find something that actually worked well enough to do that. So then now we're looking at a raid. So now you're not going to be able to strike him. So now you got to put U.S. soldiers and airmen on the ground, 100 miles behind, west of the Euphrates, behind enemy lines, literally. You got to fly them in there. You got to do all the things that a raid force does. Now, again, we got the best people in the world at doing this. And so I had no doubts about the ability of the raid force to get in, do what it was going to do on the ground, and then get out, because I've worked with these folks a lot. They're very good. I have complete and total trust in them. And I knew that we had rehearsed it, as you might expect. We built full-scale models of it. The problem wasn't that. The problem was that to get there, we had to fly through Russian-controlled airspace. And we were right then having an argument with the Russians. They were trying to push across the Euphrates River further south at a place called Deir ez-Zar, and they were building a bridge there. And we told them, if you build that bridge, we're going to destroy that bridge. And so the chairman actually called Gerasimov and conveyed this message to him, which was not received in good spirits on the other end. And so we were in it. So we talked about how we were going to do it. So I was confident the raid force in its specialized helicopters could get in and out and not be seen. Just trust me, we can do that. So what would be vulnerable, though, I had to fly drones in at 12,000 feet above ground level to look at the objective, provide video, to provide fire support, and under certain circumstances to provide communications relays. Well, those things fly. They're fat, dumb, and happy. They can't protect themselves. They fly slow. Even the Syrians could shoot them down. So we looked at that, and we had a go, no-go criteria, and we decided we'd do a couple things. First of all, let me back up a minute. and say, this was the plan. I went up and briefed President Trump on this plan in the yellow oval of the White House, which is one of the most beautiful rooms in the United States. It sits right behind the Truman balcony, looking down the front lawn to the Washington Monument. It's the room where FDR was in when they told him about Pearl Harbor, because FDR used to work in a stamp collection now, and it's different, very different now. It's a beautiful, but it's yellow, and you can look it up on the White House website. I went up there 3 or 4 days before, and I briefed the president on it, and talked him through it, laid out the graphics for him. Director of CIA was there, the National Security Advisor, the chairman was there, the Secretary of Defense was traveling, but he was able to come in by phone, and the Vice President was there, and we talked through the operation, and I gave him my recommendation. He accepted my recommendation, so we're gonna work the plan that I've just described to you. But a key thing was, again, we were worried about the MQ-9s. If they shot the MQ-9s down, it would be a no-go. We would not have what we needed to go in and do the operation. Again, I wasn't worried about anybody jumping on those helicopters, because we had F-22s and F-15s stacked up, a lot of them east of the Euphrates River. They would have gone to Afterburner and gotten there real quick had there been a problem with Russian airplanes. So we weren't worried about that, but I was worried about my drones. So we launched the force, we pushed the drones, and we agreed that General Milley is going to call General Gerasimov and tell him we're doing this, with about an hour's notice, maybe a little less, because we figured, tell the Russians they can't possibly exercise command and control inside an hour to tell their forces what to do. We will have told them, we'd have satisfied that obligation, but they would not. So he called him, and Gerasimov said, well, we're not going to let you do it. We're going to prevent you. So Milley said, okay, fine. Think hard about that. But so we flew in, and the Russians didn't do anything. And because I don't, either he made a decision not to do it, or they couldn't transmit the orders down to the force. The Russian air defenses are okay. They're no good against the force coming in, or people, but they're pretty good against drones, because drones are easy to shoot down. So we noted they painted the drones. You can see it when somebody looks at it and locks it up with a radar, but they didn't shoot them down. So the drones went in. So I'm sitting in Tampa watching this in real time, and we get on the ground, force goes in, and what you do in a raid like this is no different than a raid you do at a Ranger school or as a Marine infantry officer. You go in, you surround the objectives so nobody can get in, nobody can get out. Then you go in, and what we do then is we have a call out. We have a colloquial Arabic speaker who goes in and says, hey, come on out. Come on, you're surrounded. There's no place to go. And a couple of the women came out shooting, and we killed them. And a man or two came out shooting, we killed them. And then 12 of the children came out, and we're able to pull 12 of the children out, and they lived. Baghdadi disappeared into a hole underneath the building, blew himself up with 2 of the children. So nothing we could do about that. So now it becomes a DNA exercise. You've got to prove that that's him. So there's a process for that, as you would imagine. So we executed that process. Takes a little time to do that. This is where Conan the Wonder Dog, some of you may remember from that time, the soft dog that they put down there. Conan was actually a pretty bad-tempered dog, and he had spent his life being shot at. And so you can imagine Conan's down in the tunnel. We've got a camera mounted on him. Electrical cables are shocking him, and we're urging Conan to go forward to get a picture. And, so I can understand probably why Conan was not a happy camper. We got Conan back out. He was banged up a little bit, but he got back out. And then we had to send people down there to actually complete the DNA testing, which we did. And then we got everybody back out. But it was different, and it was different than the Soleimani strike, because U.S. people on the ground. It's a lot easier to do this when you're dropping a weapon from a platform and you don't have a force deep behind enemy lines. And we had provisions. We would, you've always got a plan if something happens. We would have been okay if that had happened, but you're way back there, and you worry about that a lot when you got people working on the ground. So it was a good operation. I think we would have captured the guy if he wanted to be captured. He didn't want to be captured, and he chose to kill himself. We didn't kill him, and we got the DNA out. And as they came out, what I didn't want was to have a shrine there, so I ordered. I got a bunch of F-15s stacked up east of the Euphrates River. We attacked with JDAMs and JASMs, and so we put down about 22,000-pound bombs across the what was the villa there to eradicate it completely. There's images of that actually out there. So when I did the Pentagon, it looks like a nuclear explosion, and big boom. But that was the Baghdadi operation. And here's the one thing I would tell you is our special operations forces do operations like this all the time. This just happened to be a high visibility one because of the nature of the target. But men and women of the Special Operations Command are out there, and JSOC are out there doing this kind of stuff all the time. And we should be glad that they're good at it. They're the best in the world at it.
That's great, sir. So I'd like to shift to Afghanistan. I served under you there from 2019 to 2020, and I can distinctly remember planning for the go to zero option in around early 2020, so about a year and a half before it actually happened. And that was really just a reduction to an embassy guard force is what the go to zero was. We built that plan somewhat begrudgingly because we thought it was a bad choice and nobody would actually ever do this, right? And until we were ordered to do it. Can you describe your experience as the senior officer who had to execute that drawdown in Afghanistan and then that evacuation from Kabul? What did you learn? Is there anything we could have done better?
Sure. So when we have this discussion, here's how I always preface it. We left Afghanistan because two American presidents, as unlike as any two presidents in American history, both shared a desire, and that was to leave Afghanistan and to leave completely. And as a result of that, you had policy continuity across the first Trump administration into the Biden administration because they both wanted to get out. Had that not happened, none of this would have happened. But you had policy continuity. Began with the signing of the Doha Accord in February 2020 under President Trump's watch. Zalmay Khalilzad, our negotiator, signed it with the Taliban. The Afghan government wasn't involved, which was a mistake. But the plan was, we're leaving. And the Taliban said, we'll do 7 things when you leave, as you leave. And we gave them a date. We were going to leave by the end of May 2021. So we said, we're leaving. We're on a schedule here. And the Taliban undertook to do 7 things, one of which was to stop attacking U.S. forces, which largely they did. They doubled up their attacks on Afghan forces, though, during this period of time. But they did none of the other things they were supposed to do. They didn't provide reasonable assurances that Al-Qaeda and ISIS would be able to use Afghanistan as ungoverned space in which to plot attacks against the United States. They didn't negotiate in good faith with the government of Afghanistan. A variety of things they said they would do, which they did not do. There were conditionality clauses in that agreement, which we never executed. That's not a military decision. That's above the level of the U.S. military. So we never actually executed the conditionality there. So I actually went and briefed President Trump on our plan to leave Afghanistan on the 3rd of June, 2020. Went up to the White House, went down to the sit room, briefed him and most of the cabinet on the plan that you guys put together. And it was a plan to leave completely and explain the consequences of that plan. If we leave, probably Afghans are going to fold. There's going to be significant problems. But it was also the plan that we briefed would have brought everybody out. Embassy, U.S. citizens, everybody would have come out at about the same time at different rates. Hold that thought. So we go the summer, we get into the fall. And what President Trump, and I'm sorry, the decision I got from that brief was, and the decision I saw it was, we're going to go to about, let me get my numbers right, 4,500 by election day. And then, Mr. President, you can make a decision if we're going to go to 0 by an inauguration day, which I don't recommend, or we can go to 0 by May, which I don't recommend, or we can hold at 2,000, hold at a higher number, which is what I recommended. Okay. Election day comes, President fires Secretary Esper, and then makes a decision to go to 2,500 by inauguration day. So that was a number that none of us had, just a number that we got from the White House, top-down guidance. General Miller was my commander, so I'm a 4-star overall commander. I had an Army 4-star named Scott Miller, another great soldier, who worked for me as my commander in Afghanistan. He was the actual Resolute Support Mission commander. And so we worked together very, very closely on this throughout all phases, this kind of planning that we're talking about now. So President Trump leaves office, President Biden comes in, we're at 2,500. And he begins a review to determine what are we going to do. So I had the opportunity to brief the president twice in February of 2020 on this. Not physically, but virtually, because I was forward in the theater both times. So I'm on Hollywood Squares with him, which is the way you do a lot of these briefings anyway. So I had an opportunity to brief him, and my strong recommendation was stay at 2,500. At 2,500, you can keep the Afghans functioning. It won't be pretty, but they'll function. Scott Miller had a good plan to do that. You can keep Bagram Air Base, which I viewed as vital. You can keep Kandahar open, which I viewed as vital. And you can then keep the Afghan forces in the field, which then provides the capability you, the United States, need to conduct counter-terrorist operations against Al-Qaeda and ISIS, which is the principal reason we're there now, is to prevent attacks against the United States from happening. So that was my argument. You can do it from over the horizon if you leave. My words were, it's not impossible, it's very, very hard. And we should all think about the Iran rescue mission anytime we think about operations like that. Eagle Claw back in April 1980. So mid-April, the president makes a decision. I'm actually on an airplane fixing to take off out of Tampa to come up here we'll come to DC to run a course for 3-star generals. And I hold the plane, talk to the secretary, said, the president, we're going to zero. Zero means zero, except not really. It means 700 soldiers to guard the embassies and the Kabul International, which is only for that limited function. You're giving up Bagram, you're giving up everything else, and we're completely leaving. We're going to pull out all our support for the Afghan military. We're going to put out all the aviation support we give them to keep their Air Force flying. We're directed to study, can we do it by iPads? So, can you help a mechanic repair an engine by working an iPad? Well, look, United Airlines tried this and it didn't work. So you can imagine the probability of success with that, with really a technologically illiterate culture in Afghanistan that doesn't have the literacy of people here in the United States that are trying to do this, where it didn't work. So we're pulling out. So Scott Miller executes a plan to do a military withdrawal. But here's the thing, and this is a very important thing. When we decided to pull our forces out, we did not, by we, I mean the highest levels of the United States, we kept our embassy, which then was the largest embassy in the world, pushing 4,000 people. We did not bring them out. We did not bring our tens of thousands of U.S. citizens out. And we did not bring out the 100,000 or more Afghans who were at risk as a result of having cooperated with us, fought with us during the long 20 years of war. So like clockwork, we withdraw. Scott Miller's very good at this. His staff is very good at this. By 12 July, we're out. It's gone. And here's an important point. All U.S. military equipment came out of Afghanistan. We didn't leave anything behind. There's a lot of military equipment, U.S. military equipment in Afghanistan. That's stuff the Afghans had. Anything that was ours, we brought out. Now, there's billions of dollars of equipment there that we left with the Afghans, and I'm not denying that. But I just want to be clear, we didn't leave anything behind that was operated as part of a U.S. tactical capability. So we're out there by 12 July. The Afghans are beginning to collapse by now. It's pretty clear that's going to happen. Provincial capitals begin to fall. I'd given advice on this as far back as the fall of 2020, that if we pull out completely, the Afghan government is not going to be able to survive. Fielded army is not going to be able to survive. It won't be the collapse of an army. It'll be the collapse of a state. So wrote a lot of letters on that are out there for historians to find one day. And so, but we get into high summer. Provincial capitals are going down. It's an ugly situation. We've still got 2,000 people in that embassy. We still got tens and tens of thousands of U.S. citizens because we have not required them to leave. And we have hundreds of thousands of Afghans that we want to get out, whom we have begun to bring out through the Special Immigrant Visa Program, which some of you may be familiar with, which actually is a retail solution to a wholesale problem. You're bringing out dozens of people when you need to be bringing out thousands of people every day. So what you do when you bring an embassy and all your American citizens out is called a non-combatant evacuation operation. Under the U.S. plan for this, the Department of State orders that, not the Department of Defense, and the Department of State's in charge. This was ordered on 14 August. So think about it. And that's what led to the images that followed in the next 2 weeks. We waited too late. Whether you believe it's American exceptionalism or American arrogance, the belief that, you can lose and still dictate what goes on. Well, you can't. The laws of history work even against the United States. There's no special house rule that says that, Americans are going to be protected if you do something like this. So it was a very difficult situation. I'm very proud of the people that went in and executed the operation on the ground. The 82nd Airborne went in, put a bunch of Marines in on the ground. I thought they did a fantastic job. Current Army Forces commander in Europe, a guy named Chris Donahue, another great soldier, went in, had a great SEAL named Pete Vaisley and a Marine named Farrell Sullivan. The three flag officer leaders on the ground who actually put this together. It's a significant tragedy that we lost 13 Americans in execution at Abbey Gate. I mourn their loss, as I mourn the 2,600 other Americans who died in this conflict. And so could have been worse. We could have had more attacks. We stopped those attacks. But it's the ones that you don't stop that you remember. And there's the ones that I remember. And but we got 124,000 people out. If you did a Venn diagram of the Afghans you brought out, probably not the ones you would have wanted. We got a lot of them out, but it wasn't a Venn diagram that overlapped, and there were reasons for that I can talk about if anybody wants to go into that. We did get a lot of people out. Would have liked to have continued it, but it wasn't feasible. The deal we had was you got to be out by the end of August, or I believe the Taliban would have turned on us. The Taliban did not turn on us. They wanted us to leave. We wanted to leave. So had we stayed, we would have had to fight them as well as ISIS. And that would have required the introduction of significant additional combat capability, like, to use a technical term, a corps slice. I would have had to put a division and a corps headquarters in there to continue the fight. Nobody's interested in putting 30,000 American soldiers and Marines back on the ground in Afghanistan in late August. So we should have turned out differently. I think about it a lot, as I'm sure many of you do.
Yes, sir. I appreciate that, sir. So I'm going to open it up to your questions now. And the way we'll do this is I'll call on you, and then we'll bring a microphone over to you as we're recording this. So we want to get your question on the microphone. So please do that. So Larry, you can have the first go here.
Hi, I'm Larry Goodson. I'm a colleague of Tom's, trying to learn from Tom at the War College. So earlier, I said I was going to ask about Afghanistan, but I'm not, because you just gave a really good answer on Afghanistan. It was interesting. But I did want to ask you a little bit about something you said earlier about Iran being an ancient civilization, former world leader, and around for a long time. It's going to continue to be around for a long time. And I'm just curious, because I'm working on something on this. So, you mentioned Artesh, you mentioned Sepah, IRGC, and then you mentioned IRGC Quds Force. So you had the home team, and then you have the sort of forward defense team that was functioning. And the forward defense team was largely using hybrid warfare or regular warfare approaches to run militias and do all of that. And now, between the Soleimani killing and the Israeli effort to destroy Hamas and Hezbollah and the attacks that have happened on the Houthis and so forth, a lot of that capability as well as leadership is gone. So my question is, what is Iran going to do going forward with their strategic approach to not only the Shia parts of the Middle East, but in general, the Middle East and their neighborhood? Thank you.
Well, that's a very insightful question, and it is the million-dollar question. So here's the thing. 2024 was a disastrous year for Iranian policy. It was a systematic destruction of their national security policy. So you hit most of the high points, but let's think about this. The most significant pressing threat to the state of Israel is Lebanese Hezbollah, because they had tens of thousands of highly accurate missiles at very short range on Israel's northern border. And they were very well led. Hassan Nasrallah was a pretty canny strategist. So today, as I speak to you, Hassan Nasrallah is no longer in a position to give strategic advice to anybody. And the Hezbollah missile capability has been gravely reduced by Israel. So the principal strategic hedge of Iran, which they prepared over decades by moving weapons, personnel, money across Iraq, Syria, and into Lebanon, that is now no longer an option for Iran. And believe me, again, as the CENTCOM commander, I worried more about attacks from up north into Israel than I did about anything else. And here's why. So let's shift gears. So over the last several months, Iran has attacked Israel twice. Did it in April, did it in late October, I think. I may have that date wrong. But at any rate, in the fall and in the spring. Those attacks had nothing to do with Gaza. They had everything to do instead with the fact that Iran has been outfought by Israel in the shadow war that they fight eternally around the region, culminating in the 1 April strike on IRGC planters in Damascus, for which no one has claimed credit, but I think we can all assume it's not the Dutch that did that. So Iran had to reset. And they chose to do that by launching something very unusual, a major attack on Israel, which crosses a Rubicon for them. They've never done that before. So they launched a combination of drones, land attack cruise missiles, and heavy ballistic missiles. So here's the thing. The Iranian template, we know it and understand it. You go with your drones first, then your land attack cruise missiles to hopefully take out the radars, which then make it not possible for the ballistic missile defense assets to strike your heavy missiles that are coming in. Well, the attack failed, and it failed for three reasons. First of all, the Israelis are pretty good. Failed because we helped the Israelis, although most of the work was done by Israel. And the third reason, which isn't widely known, it was helped because the neighbors of Israel helped. And another factor, if you think, I don't have a map here, Israel is a long way from Iran. It takes a long time for those drones and cruise missiles to get there. It doesn't take long for a ballistic missile to get there, but it's still strategic depth. But here's the other thing. Iran probably has 4,500 ballistic missiles of various kind. Probably 1,000 of them are capable of reaching Tel Aviv, but they cannot launch all 1,000 at one time. They have to take them out of storage, put them on what we call a TEL, a tractor erector launcher, haul it to a launch site, a surveyed launch site, raise it. If it's liquid fuel, then you got to fuel the stack, it takes time, and then you got to launch. So for the sake of argument here tonight, let's just say there are 200 of those. So that's the max shot count you can get against Israel from Iran. You can't launch 1,000 missiles against Israel. You can launch 200. 200 missiles are not going to overwhelm Israeli air defenses. Not David Sling, not with THAAD in there, not Iron Beam, Iron Dome, all the capabilities that exist in Israel. It's going to be very hard, Patriot systems, it's going to be very hard to penetrate that. And they didn't. They didn't the first time. So the Israeli response was interesting. I worried that the Israelis would hit back in a heavy-handed way, which would send the theater into a war. The Israelis were actually very discreet in their response to that 13 April attack. What they did was they operated in the Tehran-Esfahan corridor with presumably low visibility platforms, missiles, and perhaps drones. And they struck some things that let the Iranians know, look, we're much better than you, and we can come back tomorrow night if we want. So the Iranians perhaps did not fully digest that lesson. And so, but the other thing it did, the Israeli response did not produce bloodshed in Iran, which would push the then current administration away from Israel or the Arab neighbors away from Israel. So in that way, at the political level, it was a very intelligent response. So, okay, now we go forward. The Iranians ultimately feel they got to strike Israel again, perhaps because of the death of the Hamas political leader in a guest house in Tehran. Again, probably not the Dutch that did that, but I think the Israelis might have actually claimed that. But we don't know how they did it, and the Iranians don't know how they did it, so they're going through massive counterintelligence contortions, which is always good to see when you try to figure out, was it human intelligence that leaked? It's a big deal for them. So they struck again. This time they recognized the futility of using drones and cruise missiles, and they just went with ballistic missiles. In an attempt earlier in the evening, a lot of tactical reasons for it, and it was similarly, in my judgment, unsuccessful. So as a result of that, today, Iran is the weakest they've ever been. And the Israelis actually, they laid it, so the Israelis go back in this time. They're a little more violent than they were in the last strike, but what they do is they remove the Iranian air defense system. Their S-300 missile systems are largely gone. They've still got some stuff, but it's not very good. And they're naked before their enemies now. Iran is uniquely and powerfully vulnerable right now. And what the Israelis, I think, hoped Iran would do would be to strike back yet again. And then they laid a trap for them. The Iranians did not fall into that trap. They didn't strike back because they knew the inevitable result would be disastrous for them. So I think where we are right now is are the Israelis going to strike again? Are they going to go after the nuclear program? I will tell you, as someone who's very familiar with the Iranian nuclear program, that's a difficult target to strike. You can strike it. We can strike it. We can probably do a better job because we have capabilities the Israelis don't have. I don't think we're going to do that. I don't know if the Israelis will do it. If you listen to what's out there in the media, the Israelis talk a lot about doing it. That's a solution. The other solution would be, and history is always informative here, in 1987, when the Iran-Iraq war went bad for Iran, the supreme leader, then Khomeini, did what he called he took a drink from the poisoned chalice, and he signed a truce with Iraq. because, go back, the principal objective of Iranian statecraft is survival of the regime. He did that to protect the regime. I would argue the Iranians, they are actually rational calculators of odds, will drink from the poison chalice again. And now is the time, not necessarily to attack them, but to force them to take measurable things that would change the nuclear program, their pursuit of a nuclear weapon, that would change their obsession with destruction of Israel, and a variety of other things. Look, so that's a big bridge, and the Iranians are much better negotiators than they are fighters. So you got to be careful getting in they typically out-negotiate us every time we negotiate with them. So you've got to negotiate with a lot of sticks as well as carrots. But we are at a momentous period in the theater right now because of the weakness of Iran. It's a good question. Thanks for asking.
Sir, go ahead, back over here.
Sir, you teed it up earlier, so let me ask you about the Afghanistan question that you said perhaps we could bring up later. How come the people that we were able to get out weren't the ones that we necessarily wanted to get out?
Sure, because as we began to let people through the gate, the guidance changed on who we let through the gate. Guidance came down to us from a level above the military that if they're at the front of the line, you're going to let them on. So if you were able to force your way to the front of the line, you're able to get on. That's why a lot of young, able-bodied men were able to get out, and women and children perhaps less so. It's not something I think we should be particularly proud of.
Okay, young man back here with the blue shirt.
So had the U.S. have not pulled out of Afghanistan, what would you have seen 5, 10, 20 years down the line that you think would have been different had we have pulled out then than however many years ago, 4 years, 5 years ago?
Sure.
And also, how do you think we can kind of avoid these prolonged wars going forward?
Second part, that's a great question. We have not solved that as a nation to this point, but I'll come back to that in a minute. So let's examine where we are now in Afghanistan. ISIS-K is resurgent, and ISIS-K harbors direct intention to attack the United States homeland. Today, nobody's looking at Afghanistan. We don't have the capability to look into Afghanistan. We don't know really what's going on, except we don't know. Al-Qaeda I'm less worried about attacks from Al-Qaeda, frankly, than I am about ISIS-K. ISIS-K carried out a very large mass casualty strike just south of Moscow a few months ago. They aimed to attack us here. So by the fact that we left without assuring that we had a plan to prevent that group from resurging, we have opened a door that I think is going to grow increasingly open over time. So my prediction is attacks against the West and attacks against us, we will see more of those in the months and years ahead from Afghanistan. That's the actual situation that exists now. So the counterfactual is, well, what if we left 2,500 soldiers there? So reasonable people would say, look, you can't do it with 2,500. I and my commander, Scott Miller, who have a great deal of respect for his judgment, we felt we could, because people don't remember, when we had 2,500 people on the ground in Afghanistan on Inauguration Day, NATO had 5,000 troops there. People don't realize this. NATO would have stayed. NATO wanted to stay, but NATO can't stay without unique U.S. capabilities, medical support, intelligence support, the things that we bring as the indispensable nation to any alliance. But NATO would have stayed and would have kept significant troops in Afghanistan had we chosen to do so. Now look, again, just to be in full candor and openness, people say, well, the Taliban would have attacked you, you would have needed more forces, we'd have ended up building up again. That's possible, don't know, counterfactual. I would argue that what we needed to do was change our negotiating tone with the Taliban and not be so supine when we talk to them and actually require them to do things or hurt them if they didn't do those things. And we had tools to hurt the Taliban that we never employed. Look, that's a great question. I wish I could give you an answer. I grapple with that all the time. But to go back to where, the second part of your question, look, the United States, we view ourselves as exceptional. We view ourselves as above the laws of history, and we're not. And we're not above the laws of history. And I still think we are the indispensable nation. But we went into Afghanistan for a fairly narrow purpose. And that purpose grew over time to where we were going to create a civil society there. Here's the trick. Afghanistan is not ungovernable. It is ungovernable under a Western model. Afghanistan is very governable, and it has been governed. But we attempted, we expanded. We felt that we could do things that no other nation had been able to do there, and we learned that we were not able to do those things. Good question. Thank you.
So we got time for one more. I'm going to go with Stephanie here in the front.
Hi, sir. I'm Stephanie Sellers. I'm the CIA rep to the War College. And I was wondering if you could talk to whatever extent possible about relationship building. So intelligence is a relationship between the COCOM, and some things that made those relationships successful with the intelligence community and some that maybe lessons learned.
So thanks for asking that question. So I felt we had a remarkably good relationship with the CIA and the intelligence agency writ large. The whole time, it was a priority for me. I went to see the director of CIA before I came into the office, and I'd worked with her before because I'd been the director of the Joint Staff and had an opportunity to see her. You know, you got a large, robust CIA cell at Central Command. And so they were very, we were able to do some things together. I think the Soleimani strike, the Baghdadi strike are both actually very good indications of the degree to which we work together. And I'm a huge consumer of intelligence products. You know, I'd begin my day with a PDB. I get my NSA guys in for the signals intelligence. Then my J2 would come in. But I was open to an intelligence person at any time of the day or night, because I really do believe, as a commander, particularly today, you know, you have to be informed by that, and your intelligence people have to feel that, you know, they can come in and talk to you. And sometimes they're going to be wrong. But here's the thing. One of the things that took me a while to learn this as a commander, and I'll sort of close out by this, you got to be, it's important for a commander to have the same open idea about information, whether it's good information or bad information, where they're telling you a story you really don't want to hear. Or, because here's the thing, if you shoot the messenger in the face, well, the messenger still got to come in and give you the message. But nobody likes getting shot in the face. So they will tend to produce information that is a little colored. And what I really needed was real information. So it was a strategic objective of mine to have a good relationship with CIA in particular, because that has not always been the case. And there's blame on both sides. It's not on one side. But I thought there were certain things I could do. And there were some personalities up there that you'll be familiar with that I got along with, I cultivated, they cultivated me. And it was a good opportunity. I think it was a really good time for interagency relations. Thanks for, I'm glad to see you're here. You need to be here.
So, sir, I think I speak for everybody here today to tell you thank you. That was awesome, right? Especially that last little piece about intelligence, right? That's particularly important to me. So, but thanks so much for the group. General Mckenzie is going to move to the table in the back to sign books after this. So I ask you don't bum rush him up here if you're with additional questions. Catch him back there when he signs your books.
Thank you for listening to our lecture. The U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center at Carlisle Barracks, Pennsylvania, USA is an integral part of the U.S. Army War College and maintains the knowledge repositories that support scholarship and research about the U.S. Army and its operating environment. To learn more about the Army's history or to plan a visit to our center, please visit us online at www.usahec.org. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube to learn more about past and upcoming events.
And that concludes our program. Thank you for listening. The views expressed in this podcast reflect those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views, policies, or positions of the U.S. Army or the Department of Defense. Let us know what you think. Provide us your feedback, comments, or suggestions through our webpage at warroom.armywarcollege.edu, and have a great day.